All right, let's talk policy, because I know you guys on the editors have been talking a lot about what would, if McAuliffe were to lose, what would a McAuliffe loss, a Youngkin victory mean for the Biden agenda? And I ask you that on a sweeping level, and then also with respect to his two huge spending bills, which I know is really of interest to you. But I mean, a very popular Republican said to me last night privately, watch Pelosi and Schumer, because you think it's difficult herding cats. Try herding scared cats.
Well, I hope that your interlocutor there is correct. Thus far today, it doesn't seem as if that has got through as a message to the Democratic Party, although Joe Manchin made some noises this afternoon. I think it would be really quite absurd if the Democrats didn't see this as a repudiation. A lot of what happened last night in Virginia was the product of Virginia politics. We just discussed some of it. And we didn't even get to Terry McAuliffe's contention that parents should not be involved in their children's education.
Something 8 out of 10 voters disagreed with him on.
Right. But whether or not this should be the case, a lot of last night was also clearly about the national environment. And the national environment is just not good for Democrats at the moment. It's happened pretty quickly. Joe Biden's really unpopular. His approval rating in Virginia yesterday was 43%. His administration is underwater on almost every key issue. The bills that he's trying to push through Congress are not popular. Most people don't know what's in them, and what they do know about what's in them, they dislike. You don't need to take my word for that. I am quoting a Democratic-aligned think tank called Third Way, which acknowledged this morning. Most Democrats want these bills, but independents and Republicans do not. And I've seen people arguing, well, this election disaster indicates that we need to get our act together. We need to pass the Biden agenda. I think that's ridiculous. I think it's self-evidently ridiculous, but I also think it's ridiculous given the high turnout in Virginia. If this had been a low turnout race, you could have credibly made an argument, look, Democrats are disillusioned because they haven't got what they wanted. They shouldn't be disillusioned because they have 50 votes in the Senate and a cushion of 3 in the House. The fact they're trying to achieve this with these narrow margins is silly, but maybe they'd be disillusioned. But turnout in Virginia last night was huge. Terry McAuliffe got more votes last night as the losing candidate than any Democrat has ever got in any gubernatorial race in the history of Virginia. Wow. He just lost because Youngkin got more. So high turnout helped the Republican. And that suggests to me that if we're going to speculate as to how the national environment and the congressional environment is affecting local races, we should do the opposite. We should say, look, people really don't seem happy with what the Biden administration is trying to push through. And if you look at the exit polling from CNN, there's a lot to bear that out. The vast majority of Virginians said that Joe Biden is too liberal rather than liberal enough or not liberal enough. The vast majority of Virginians said that they wanted government to do less. So I don't see how we could draw from this that these terrible losses in Virginia and elsewhere somehow ratify a Biden agenda that Americans didn't ask for in the first place. It's not why he was elected.
Julian Castro was on MSNBC last night saying McAuliffe was the wrong candidate. I think he may have tweeted this. Too moderate. We should have had someone much more left. I mean, if that's where they're going to go, I don't know that he speaks for the party, but if that's where they're going to go, I think bloodbath will be another word we'll be using after the midterms in 2022, no?
I think so. And this is a mistake that both parties make. You hear this on the right, too. Sometimes Republicans lose winnable races, and they say, well, the guy we ran was a squish. He wasn't conservative enough. There wasn't enough of a difference. It's rarely true. There are certain moments in history where you need sharp differences, but usually that is a form of denial. And that's just not true here. I mean, when the Democratic primary was underway in Virginia, most people correctly said Terry McAuliffe would have the best shot because he was more moderate. And if you look at the environmental factors yesterday at the state and federal level, the idea that if he'd been a hardcore progressive, he'd have won is I think silly. And it's also somewhat contradicted by what we've seen in actually progressive areas. I mean, I mentioned earlier, Seattle just elected a Republican, and up in Buffalo, New York, a socialist candidate, self-described socialist candidate, was beaten 2-1 by a write-in candidate. So I'm not really on board with that argument.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was in New Jersey. We were following a race by a guy. It was a truck driver who spent, I think, $149 on his campaign, who just ousted an incumbent in one of the state races. It's amazing. New Jersey. Now we're not talking Texas. So the voting population is telling us something, but expand on it, because I know it's not all about CRT. And I actually think even the school battle's not just about CRT. It involves COVID lockdowns and never ending masking. And I was saying to my friend the other day, I almost feel like they've forgotten about our children. Like they slap masks on them and they have to go and wear them 8 to 10 hours a day, not in Florida where you are. No. And then they just moved on. And it was like the CDC said a couple of weeks ago, well, by the way, you can't take them off even when you vaccinate your child, which we're likely to make mandatory. Okay, but like everyone else has them off in the grown-up level, and at some point they need to come off, and you have no metrics. So I think that's in there. I do think the inappropriate content that I highlighted with my last guest is something that people are upset about. But the backlash that we're seeing coast to coast, it goes beyond schools. It speaks to crime, right? The rising crime numbers, police. You frame it for me.
Well, I think that one way of looking at this is to think of where we are relative to where we were a year ago. And two things have happened that are pretty negative for President Biden. The first one is that he is now the president instead of Donald Trump. And what I mean by that, it's obviously good for Biden personally, but after a certain point, presidents own problems. Now, as a libertarian-leaning guy, I often think it's unfair what we put on our president, but it's also unfair what presidents claim they can do. And Joe Biden, when he was running, said he was going to make the economy better. He was going to shut down the virus. He's done neither of those things. Now, some of it's not his fault, but at the same time, if you say, I'm going to fix things, and then you don't, people notice. And the Democrats have thought they could get around this by saying Trump, 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 Trump every 10 seconds. We saw Terry McAuliffe do this in Virginia. It works maybe for 1, 2, 3 months at the beginning of a presidency, and then it goes away. People just don't think like that. So Biden is now suffering from expectations that haven't been met. The other thing that's happened is the politics have turned on a number of crucial questions for him in the wrong direction, just at the wrong time. Back in September, when he announced his federal mask mandate, which I think is flatly unconstitutional, it had majority support. It wasn't huge, but it was 54, 55. Now, and it hasn't actually been implemented yet, although I hear it's about to be. Now it's
underwater.
The
vaccine mandate.
Vaccine mandate. Sorry, I misspoke. The vaccine mandate's now underwater. Partly, I think, because people have seen their friends and family get fired in some areas. Partly because I think it has made things worse in terms of selling the vaccine. The vaccine is a good thing, and it should be easier to sell than it is. And the same thing, I think, has happened with masking in schools. I think people's patience, as you suggest, is wearing thin with school closures. That was another factor in Virginia. And it's also happened on the economy. Gallup tracks American sentiment towards the size of government. 3 months ago, Americans said the government could be bigger, could do more. Now, they're back to saying it should be smaller, do less, and we should be leaving more roles to businesses and individuals.